Jeff again. This is a 2009 RZR 800, just a standard 800. There's lots of them running around. And it has a transfer case leak on the front cover. So you see the telltale transmission lube on the floor. And it got worse and worse, and it's just leaking out of the seam. The seal's still good. According to the manual, you're not supposed to be able to do this, but I'm going to try it anyway, so I figure I document it as we go. You can see I removed the seats. It's up on jack stands, secured that way. Pull the shift knob with a T25 Torx. The screw is back in there right now, and the knob just slides off. Pry the top off with a screwdriver first. Then I took the center console out. Basically that's the two screws at the back that you normally take out when you need to do any belt service, plus 4 bolts on the passenger side, 3 bolts on the driver's side, and then there's 2 in the front. Don't lose the little metal tabs that are on the floor. You probably won't be able to see that. The next thing I did was take the 4 bolts out of the front differential. Did not unhook anything else. I just slid the front differential forward. You can see it's at an awkward angle. You can reach through the tie-down hole in the front of the frame, and I just pried it up with a large screwdriver, and that pulled the drive shaft off of the transfer case output shaft. A shot from the other side of what it looks like. That's the transfer case output shaft and the prop shaft. The reason I did this is because I don't want to pull the motor, transmission, and rear end unless I have to, because all of this stuff has to come off in order to do that. So after I made sure the prop shaft would come off of the the prop shaft would come off of the transfer case output shaft, I removed the belt cover. Don't forget to unhook the snorkel, just like you would normally do for any belt service. The drive clutch, the driven clutch simply slides off. What you got to watch is there's shims at the back of there. Make sure you keep them in order and measure the thickness, because you're going to need them to put them back on. The next piece is a little more complicated. They make a puller to get the the primary clutch off, but the local shop does not have one. So I got a piece of 3/4 inch National Fine all thread, 2 nuts. You can see it leaning over there against the other side, and I'm gonna build a puller, because most of the Polaris stuff on the inside that I've messed with is 3/4 fine, and I'll just jam a couple of nuts on there. So I'm gonna go build that. I'll take pictures of it in a minute. There's the tool installed, and that's 3/4 16. National Fine by 7 inches long, and I actually should have cut it about 1/4 inch longer, because this end jam nut is a couple of threads off the end, and I'm going to see if I can get it off with just a twist and stabilizing the clutch with a pry bar. The clutch came off with just a couple of threads to spare. That's a 7-inch long piece. Just to give you an idea how much thread was buried in there. There's a shot of it where it's just engaged in the first couple of threads, and I'll show you the puller when I get it out. So there's the puller. It's a 3/4 16, and then what I did was just taper the end of it slightly. Make sure you got the nuts on there first, and a way to hold it, because when you push on the crankshaft, if the thing mushrooms on the end, you won't get it back out of the clutch. So make sure you cut down the end. If I had a lathe, I would cut this thing back about 4 inches and then clean the threads up. But I don't have a die and I don't have a lathe, so I did it with the nuts and a 4-inch grinder and a bandsaw. That's it. Okay, we got the clutches removed. Now I'm going to pull this clutch cover. Okay, this will give you a little idea what you're up against. That black piece is glued on with RTV from the factory. You see the blue stuff on the crank, the crankshaft of the motor, and the shaft on the lower portion of this picture is the output shaft from the transfer case, and the input shaft of the transmission with the secondary clutch mounts to is in the upper right hand corner. And the problem is going to be that we have one bolt hidden behind the casting on the motor. Basically right where the cooling hose connects to the motor. That's the clutch cooling air for the primary clutch. Actually the whole clutch housing, but we're going to have to pull that off. There's one bolt hidden behind that. There's one behind the snout. Then this bottom motor mount's going to have to come out. We're going to have to support the motor with a jack. And this thing's getting uglier by the minute, but I still think it's better than pulling the whole motor. So I'm gonna keep on going. And barring the pieces falling out that we can't get back in because it's horizontal instead of vertical like you're supposed to load it, we'll be okay. That one red bolt you'll notice is missing. It is a little stubby and not easy to get out. Note where the other colors go and where the long ones are at when you take them out. Notice how much space it took in order to get to that, even with the correct socket. And I didn't have to worry about it. I took this motor mount clear out. The rear motor mount and the engine side are still connected. So I have a jack underneath of it. I jacked the motor up. Took a 2x4 between the frame and the transfer case and bounced this until it sat down. It's hanging on the back. It's hanging on the rear mount right now, and it's wedged against the studs hanging out of the bottom of the motor. So we're going to pull the cover and see if I can seal this thing up now. Okay, I didn't get any pictures, but we have pulled the cover off, cleaned up the seal. There was an obvious leak, and put a Honda bond on it, and replaced the output shaft seal on the bottom. I refilled it with oil, and we have dry cardboard down there after 3 days. So I think we're in good shape to go back together. I use Honda Bond 4 or the Yama Bond as well. Don't use a hard forming gasket material because you'll have difficulty getting it off. One thing too, make sure you unhook the wire from the bottom because that speed sensor is connected to the computer, and you will wreck it if you pry on it or pull the cover off without it. And tighten the stuff down, let it sit for a couple of days, and then I'm gonna get the gap back out of the motor, put the plate back on the top, and we'll see if I can get all this stuff back in here. Okay, we got the motor mount bolts tightened up, top, bottom. There's 4 little ones, 2 big ones on the top, 2 nuts. There's 2 nuts on the bottom. Put the drive line back on. Put the 4 bolts back in the front differential, and all the stuff lined back up. Just for reference, I would pull the wire out of the differential, unhook it from the retainer on the frame, because I'll have to check the 4-wheel drive and see if it still works here, because I pulled on it a little bit. And then the input shaft of the transmission, just a light touch of grease on the splines to allow the clutch to slide on. This one came off, it was rusty, and basically this thing's never been wet. This is the first time I've ever washed it. So okay, before you put the back of the clutch cover on, make sure to put a layer of RTV. They had factory blue on there. I just happen to have a tube of high temp open, so I'm gonna obviously put that on there. It's better, the blue would actually be better. It keeps the water out of the clutch and away from the crankshaft, so make sure that thing's sealed up before you put it back on. Polaris sells an expensive tool to do this, but what I chose to do is take a piece of 1-inch square tubing. You just put it in one of the clutch slots. Be a little careful on what you're pushing on the bottom, and then tighten it up with a clutches out. It's a great idea to examine them closely, look for any wear, any stuck parts. There's a whole bunch of information in the manual on that. There's a whole chapter, and I just scuff them up with a little bit of Scotch-Brite to seat the belt back in. I'm going to reuse the same belt on this project. Okay, center console back in, knob back on, crossbar back, belt cover, seats back in, And hopefully we got a piece of cardboard underneath there. Hopefully we won't see a leak again, but it's mid-January, and it'll be Easter before we use it again. So I'll update after I put the video up. Thanks for watching.